welcome everyone to episode 4 of the Brick by Brick series by DSG Consumer Partners, where we talk with some of the brightest minds about building insurgent brands. For those of you who don't know, DSG Consumer Partners, we're an early stage consumer-only venture capital fund investing across India and Southeast Asia. We manage more than $275 million on behalf of our LPs. And we have invested in 73 insurgent brands across India, Southeast Asia in consumer products and services since 2012. I will be your host today. My name is Samir Mehta, and I run DSG's Southeast Asia efforts. And I'm delighted to welcome Dion Song, who is the CEO of Love Bonito. We will talk about going international and maintaining consumer love today. I'm sure we'll talk about other things as well, but that's the main theme. By way of introduction, although I don't think Dion needs any introduction, she has been at Love Bonito for more than 5 years, serving first as Chief Commercial Officer, then Chief Operating Officer, and then assuming the mantle as CEO in early 2021. Prior to her time at Love Bonito, she spent many years at Sephora Asia as well as Zalora in various senior management, digital marketing, and e-commerce related roles. So she is really what I would call a very experienced person in this space and what is a new category, new space, in a new region. She studied at NYU Stern in an undergrad. She sits on multiple boards. And in full disclosure, she's a board member at one of our portfolio companies, namely Ramblin' Brands, which makes Smile Makers, one of the world's leading female sexual wellness products that's available everywhere you can find it. That may also be why she agreed to do this. We'll find out if she's ever going to talk to me again. We have a great audience today of more than 50 people signed up, spanning early stage consumer-focused founders from India and Southeast Asia, early stage investors, brand marketeers, amongst others. Throughout this session, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A tab and ask your questions. I will do my best to try and fold those questions in during the session or leave some time at the back end to do that. All right, enough about me and the session. Let's move to Dion. Dion, can you tell us a little bit about your journey to Love Bonito? What led you to go there, right? And what has inspired you to stay on? I mean, 5 years is a long time in this day and age to be in one company. So give us some sense of background. I think that'll help frame the rest of our dialogue.
Yeah, thanks so much, Samir, and nice to meet everyone. Oh gosh, I just got a ping from Deepak. He was like, please smile more. Sorry, everyone, I have a naturally more RBF. So I'll try to very friendly. So please ask questions along the way, right? Very open to any questions that we can have a more open dialogue this evening. So yeah, I think for my journey and how I landed here, I would say quite randomly, actually. First started my career in banking and in finance. I think typical route, I guess, when you're going to an undergrad business school like Stern, where everyone's either becoming a banker or becoming a consultant, a management consultant, and it's really one of two routes, right? So I did that, but realized that, hey, I think I really wasn't enjoying it, right? There was no spark, there was no passion for the role. And I really just wanted to also make a bigger impact, right, to my day-to-day. And not just be, tweaking some lines in a model, right? Which is usually what you do as a first year investment banker. So that was when I met up with an old friend, right, from university who just left his role at McKinsey to join Rocket. And I found out, oh my God, what is this glorious place, right? This was early on, right? 2010, 2011. I was like, what is this holy land of like, wow, where they hire young people to take on and make big decisions and who have the ownership and autonomy, right, in their day to day. So I met with the Rocket team, then was asked to join as a fourth member in their payment fintech startup. So it's called Pay11. It's a sort of copy of Square, right? So payments for like bodegas and so on. You're probably wondering, what is Pay11? Well, it never launched, right? So a couple of days before my role, they told me, hey, I think there is an issue with the prototype. It's not passing regulations with MAS in Singapore. And hence it's not happening, right? And it's too expensive to redo the entire prototype. So then they asked me, hey, would you want to join sort of Zalora or Foodpanda, which was all in the same office, right, back in the days in 2011. So that was how I started my career. So totally random. I said Zalora, right? So here I am. Started in the function of on-site analytics, right? I just took the first role that they gave me. I think they thought it was a good fit. And then just worked my way through, right? Did that for a couple of years, stepped into a marketing role for Singapore. And then soon after a more senior role also for the region, right? Across Singapore, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. So I would say, I think very fortunate. I think it was entirely random, very not planned. But out of that experience, what was really very beneficial and helpful right now in hindsight as well, was that Rocket was so early on in the startup and e-commerce scene in Southeast Asia, which meant that if you really want to understand e-commerce, be really good at sort of analytics, right? On-site analytics, product management, right? Technology and all of that. It's really the place to be, to learn, right? It's a wonderful school, right? For learning all of that. and digital marketing as well, right? And back then, I guess a lot of the marketeers in Southeast Asia were still doing more traditional, right, brand marketing. And we became then the experts at really digital marketing. Yeah. And then moved to Sephora because after doing that for a while, I was wondering, hey, I think you're sort of in cowboy land, right? Learning as you go. And I was wondering, are there companies where I can also learn from maybe people a lot more experienced than me, right? Who have seen so many more years, right? In a certain industry and just learn some best practices. So that was really why I moved to Sephora. I think what was interesting was I was also very fortunate to see the company post M&A because back then they just acquired Luxola. Right. So sort of seeing two companies come together, which, I think it's a once in a lifetime or maybe a couple of times you experience all these things yourself. Right. Yeah. So those were the two. And then finally met Rachel at a women's networking event and then joined LB, right? Which the key difference for me was really going from e-commerce, which is still retailer, Sephora, which is also still retailer and a multi-brand retailer, to now being in a brand where it's very different, right? It's a lot more on the whole branding, identity, strategy, how you think about your channels as well versus a retailer or e-commerce marketplace.
Excellent. That's great. And again, congratulations on very fast progression and taking opportunities to learn. I think that's a lesson for many other young people, right? Is sometimes you just solve for where you will learn the most. And then interesting opportunities will manifest. It's hard to plan it. In hindsight, it might make sense, but you won't have the foresight to know where you will go, right? Talk me back to a little bit when you joined Love Bonito. What did the company look like? Give me some sense. You don't have to give me numbers if you can't, but some sense of revenue, target markets. Was it only a digital business at that point in time? Just so that I think our audience can understand as we talk about the transition from what it used to be to where it is now and what is to come. I think it'll help people reframe more about where Love Bonito was.
Yeah, okay, sure. I can't share revenues, right? But in terms of footprint, it was mainly in Singapore. Then also in terms of Singapore, in terms of size of operations, mainly online. We hadn't yet opened our first store in Singapore. And team size, we were just below 50 in terms of the total team size. Yeah, so that was sort of internally, right? From a fundraising landscape perspective, we just closed our Series A.
Got it.
So that was...
So again, a very different business than where we are today, right?
Yeah.
So, on that subject, right, under your watch, obviously, there's been a huge amount of change, I would say, from what I can see outside in about at Love Bonito. So walk me through, we talked about this international idea. We talked about Omni idea. Walk me through, what led to the internationalization path, right? Like we get a lot of founders who come and ask us, hey, when should we internationalize? I want to go regional. I want to go global. I get a lot of that as an investor. And then I have to sort of calm them down politely, I hope, right? Is first dominate your home market. Be number one and number two in your category in your home market. Explore offline and online fully before you go further afield. How did Love Bonito think about its internationalization playbook? Which markets? Why? In what sequence? And for what reason? Right? I think that'll help a lot of other people who are exploring those possibilities.
Yeah, understand. Oh, so different. I guess when I first joined already, LB, I think we had the pressure from investors of like, hey, go international, right? And that was really that first key priority. But of course, maybe we were already slightly more mature and slightly more mature in our markets. I would say, I think, first of all, being headquartered and starting our operations first in Singapore, I mean, there is a limit, right, to how much we can grow. But of course, then we already existed for 5 years, right, as LB. So it's a very, very different scene. So I would say back then, from an online perspective, we were definitely the leading local player already in the market. And we were only just starting offline. Right. But the landscape, I think, then was also very different, right? Meaning that in general, I think the industry and investors were also not that comfortable going offline, right? I think offline was still sort of a dirty word, right? Oh my God, why do you go offline, right? So high capex, right? There's so much risk. Why would you sign like 3-year leases, right? I think so everyone is really very apprehensive about investing in the offline expansion, right? Hence, then we started looking also actually then into other markets, right? And then already started Malaysia, Indonesia, we had just started already when I joined.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would say, I think looking back though, I think if you ask looking back, how do we think about internationalization? Probably quite a different lens, right? I think if we were to look back and sort of maybe refine also how we think about expansion, right? Firstly, I guess, I think being based in Singapore, for sure, I think you don't have the luxury of being based in a big market, right? Like India, US or UK, right? And so on, where, hey, I think you have a good, definitely 5-year runway to grow, be a leader in the market, be also interesting, attractive, and sexy enough, right? To the street, to investors before sort of hitting a limit, right? I think with your at a saturation point, right? Or hitting sort of a limit also with TAM. But in Singapore, I think the year where you have to go overseas comes a lot earlier because the market's just so much smaller. But I think the miss, I guess a lot of companies perhaps in Singapore make is that you start thinking about, okay, which are my neighboring close by markets to expand into, right? But the truth of the matter is Singapore is so different from Malaysia, from Indonesia, right? Thailand, Vietnam. And if you're a consumer brand, in a certain sort of like middle price point, it's very different, right? Because income GDP levels are totally worlds apart. So I would say I think the first mistake is not looking at just your neighboring market, Southeast Asia first, but really think about, okay, right, who is the customer I'm trying to reach out to? Where is my assortment positioning, right? And what problem am I trying to solve? Are there markets as well at a global level that really make sense, right, for a product like this? Right. So I think that that's really sort of the second bit. And for us, this includes countries like Hong Kong, right? For example, it includes countries like the US, for example, where the problem that we're trying to solve for would be, can we really cater to the Asian female, right? And really produce women's wear, fashion and beyond in a very Asian female centric way, right? That today they're not really getting served by incumbent players, international players, right? Hence our pie and oyster is actually far wider than Southeast Asia. And for us today, then Hong Kong, markets like Hong Kong and the US are actually one of our larger markets.
That's, I think, very interesting. And I would say also a little bit counterintuitive, because you're right. The traditional playbook for internationalization is I hit up against a cap. I have to go find a big market. I can explain why the, flag posting around my neighborhood makes sense. It's not as alien as going halfway across the world. Actually, what you're saying is the lens should be, who is your target audience? Who is the consumer who loves you? What do you know about them? And then focus on that, right? And of course, I assume that in early days, it was all digital expansion. It was not physical store expansion in non-Singapore countries. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. Yeah. So in terms of how we expand, right, I think having sort of the online platform today, and it's so simple, right? I think it's very easy to have your own Shopify and so on.
Right.
We try to cast a wide net, right? Meaning we have a .com that serves like more markets, right? Start doing more light touch awareness, meaning a bit more marketing, social media, right? And so on, seeding. And then we start seeing, hey, I think where do we get more natural organic traction where we already start seeing a good product market fit, right? And then we dial up. We dial up meaning that we might invest now in a little bit more local marketing resourcing. We might have a person on ground as well, right? That you can easily do a remote structure and team. Example, we do the Philippines, right? We have 1-2 people in the market, right? Really seeding and growing the market, and the market grows well. You don't have to have a full-fledged team. And then only if the market makes sense for an omni-channel expansion, right? Meaning stores, then we do it, right? And by that, we look at other metrics. We look at, I think, how malls are doing, right, in the market right now. How is sort of offline retail as well? Is it growing, right, year on year? And usually, I think those things check out, right, for most of the markets that we're in. And then we dive further. And we do that first with a pop-up store, right? Try to understand the customer better. Also work on other operational foundations, right? Like understanding sort of the market better, these terms and so on. And then only after do we invest in a more permanent store build-up.
That's really interesting. So again, what I heard was seeding, experimenting with limited capital, controlled explosions, I like calling it, right? So, you don't blow up the house if it goes awry. And as you start getting more proof points, again, in a light touch way, expand, right? So let's talk a little bit about where we are now. I think, you talked a little bit about, in hindsight, looking back and wrapping, and there's always an interesting way of putting narratives around what's happened, right? Could you always explain it that way at inception? The answer is almost never, right? But in hindsight, you can see how the pieces unfolded. You're now, if I understand, in 7 countries physically. I know you were in Japan last week opening some stores. That looked like fun. So give us a sense, how many countries? Okay. Give us a sense, how many countries or cities, if that's how you think about it, how many stores, and what potentially is happening in the future in so much as you can share.
Yeah, sure. Understand. So we like to see ourselves in 3 key regions, right? So Southeast Asia, and then North Asia, and then the Asian diaspora market. So in Southeast Asia, it depends how you define what countries we're in, right? I think online we have quite a lot of countries, so I'm not going to talk so much about that. But omni-channel, we're in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia. We have a retail franchise in Cambodia. And then Philippines would be another interesting market for us because it's growing exponentially, right? And it's only e-commerce. And then apart from that, in North Asia, mainly Hong Kong, right, we're omni-channel. We just opened our first flagship, also why I'm in Hong Kong right now.
Nice.
And then Taiwan, sort of a growing but e-commerce only market for the moment. And then Japan, right, where we are starting pop-up stores at the moment. And then lastly, we have the Asian diaspora market, right? So Australia and the US. And US would be our big bet market of focus. So right now, 10 key markets globally, 4 omni-channel markets, and then 19 stores across the region.
Got it. Excellent. I think just the way you laid some of that out also tells people a little bit about how you think, right? Seeding, pop-up, experimenting digital only first, decide what the inflection points would be to put physical infrastructure in place. Because again, with apparel fits, some physical experience is still really, really important, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we know from the work that we do in apparel, and we made a couple of investments recently in the space, that returns is a big, big problem online, right? And that really gets ameliorated if you have a physical store presence, right? And there's a nice, interesting way to close the loop. And the really great retailers have increasingly seamless omni experiences. So on that subject of omni, if I can get you to switch focus a little bit, how do you think about building that perfect store experience, irrespective of the perfect store being physical or online? Because the young consumer thinks of them quite interchangeably, right? I'm not that young, but even I expect to have a perfect experience whether I buy online or offline, right? So help me understand how you think about it. What are some of the key metrics that you guys might track? And what are some of the things that have worked or not worked in the lessons that you've learned over the years?
Yeah. A lot of people ask us always, like, how do we create that whole experience? I would say actually it just boils down to having the team really thinking from a very customer-centric and thoughtful perspective, right? Always putting the customer at the center of everything, right? And not really rolling things out, rolling features out, rolling, let's say, cool technology out for the sake of tech, right? And I think a lot of times, a lot of retailers or companies end up sort of falling in that cycle, right? Of doing something tech for tech's sake, right? You're launching it because it's cool, right? But when you ask them, hey, what's the use case? Or am I solving a problem? Typically, I guess, they have trouble answering that. I'll give specific examples, right? So when it comes to our offline experience, when we first started doing stores, right, we were really clear, hey, we don't want to do a typical store, right? We want to ensure that we're rolling out a store that's solving a lot of pain points. And we're going to be introducing features, whether it's technology or non-technological features, we will roll them out, right, to improve the overall customer experience. So if you look at our stores today, share a couple of key things. Like one, for example, because we have one example was we started it quite a while back. We noticed that, hey, I think a lot of our customers coming to our pop-up stores, just because of the brand that we are, right? I think we're quite girly, feminine, right? Quite cross-generational. So people like to come in, shop, love Bonito, always with their friends, right? They're coming with their girlfriend. They're coming sometimes with their moms. Or because we have categories like bridesmaids, they're literally coming in with a group of 5 women. So we were like, hey, why should we have a typical fitting room experience, right? We want to ensure that we allow for communal changing because women are literally buying together. And because a lot of times that they're shopping together, what they want to do and what we want to do, right, is to also give each other feedback, right? You also want to get your friends' input. How does it look, right? Does it look great? And so on. So we started rolling out modular communal fitting rooms in a lot of our stores, bigger format stores, right, to really aid the overall customer journey. But again, I wouldn't even advise other brands to do it. It's very specific to who we are at our DNA and core. Another example was a couple of years after we had a couple more stores, we realized that, okay, getting a lot of traffic right through our stores. And our queues at the fitting room was usually quite long. It's a bit longer also because our product is a little bit more intricate, right? It's a lot more workwear. It's a lot more occasion where maybe it takes a little bit longer to sort of wear in, right, to the product, not so basic. And then maybe you take time, right, to also contemplate. So instead of sort of having a typical fitting room queue, right, which you always see in a lot of stores, we were like, hey, how can we also enhance the customer experience? So we ended up rolling out fitting room queue system. And we took this, it was a leaf out of Korean barbecue restaurants, right? It's crowded outside. You leave your number, you leave, right? In like Singapore, Tanjong Pagar, all of that. So same thing. Someone can come in, they leave their number, or they take a number. It can be physical or they can send it to their phone. And then we beat them when the room is ready. So what can they do? They can do 2 things. Number one, they can either spend more time browsing on the floor, which for us is great. It increases our AOV, AOQs. Or because Singapore and a lot of the malls in stores in Southeast Asia are always in a mall versus like the US where it's a lot of street stores, right? So instead of that, they could go out to the mall, get a cup of coffee or tea, and then read them when the room is ready. What does that do, right? That also enhances their overall shopping experience because they're not wasting time, right? They get less empty as well. So that was number 2, right? Again, it's not I wouldn't say it's even high tech, right? It's just very basic. And we took it out of like the food, FMBC. So that's just an example. Yeah.
That's amazing. Oh, I can't tell you the number of times I've left a store after seeing the queue for the fitting room. It's just pointless. I'm not going to waste half an hour waiting. And then you've lost me as a customer, right? So that's super insightful. Talk me through a little bit. You talked a little bit about physical store experience, and you gave us 2 very tangible examples of what you've done that actually, frankly, I've never seen before. So that's super interesting on improving the customer experience, putting the customer at the center of it. Talk me through the digital experience, right? I order stuff online, whether it's clothing, apparel, and I have stopped, quite frankly, over the years because of fit problems. and I don't want to deal with the returns, and it's just, too messy, quite frankly, right? So that's one problem that I know exists. Then there's how does it fit on me? How will it look? So walk me through how you think about the online side of the equation, because in apparel and as investors, we have historically been very wary of apparel for this reason, right? But we are, gaining some courage and doing some things now. So I'd love to hear how you think about the online space for women's apparel, given your target audience and given the spread that you have globally.
Yeah. I think maybe first on the issue that you raised around sizing. Okay, if anyone has a very good sizing AI to recommend, please recommend me. At least
I'm
from
going
what
to send you something. I found something for you separately. I'm going to connect you with someone.
Okay.
Super interesting.
Okay. I think at least from testing so far, all the different tools, we found that actually nothing beats the traditional mode of trying, which is where the entire omni-channel experience comes in, right? And where also stores play a certain part in terms of sizing, in terms of trying, in terms of recommendation. So that's where we really think about the whole omni-channel experience. But I think beyond that, when it comes to our entire e-commerce, again, it's back to that whole customer centricity, right? I think first up is also around, let's say, discovering or browsing, where again, we go back to our customer, right? And how she's shopping and how she's also making different decisions, right? So for example, in our categories, in our filter, we have also very fun attributes, right? That make sense to our customer, right? Example, I think dresses that sort of take you from night to day, right? I think we have things like, hey, I think for women also, right, we have things like, hey, buffet friendly pants, right? Pants that really hug you, right? They hug your tush, but hey, after that, it's so comfortable, you can go through a heavy meal, right? So stuff like that, we ensure that the entire filtering experience is actually quite fun. It's very specific, but again, I think it's not going to work for another brand, right? Because it's a very, very, very different experience. Then apart from that, just ensuring that from an omni-channel point of view, all the different features are there, right? So a lot of times also customers sort of look online because they treat online almost as a catalog, right? But then I want to go into the store to try and make the final purchase. So we ensure we have things like store availability on site, right? So customers actually know, right? Is this available in our Orchard store, right? Or in our Malaysia store, for example, before actually heading down. So we have features like that. On the flip side also, we have omni-channel features in store, right? So for example, the amount of assortment you hold in any store is never going to be 100% of your e-commerce assortment, right? Of your entire warehouse. And that will be fact. That is just truth. But we try to ensure that customers, we can also upsell, let's say colors that are not shown on the floor, items that are not shown on the floor through endless aisle, right? So meaning a customer can get recommendation from our retail ambassadors in store. And then at the point of sale at the cashier, they can make a purchase, a very seamless one purchase and buy both the physical item and then the online item. And we'll ship that item right to their homes.
Oh, wow. So that's one experience. I don't have to go to
purchase, right.
Wow.
One purchase for two types of items from two very different fulfillment centers, right? So that's another way that we try to do it.
Yeah, I think what you're alluding to is, listen, you have the attention of your customer for limited periods of time, right? Now, you can try and extend the attention that they give you, but from what we see of e-commerce data, the amount of time people spend on sites is increasingly thinner and thinner and thinner, unless they really, really love what you're doing, right? Yeah. And I know, of course, Love Bonito has one of the best cohorts in the apparel industry from what I can tell. So I know you don't have that problem, but a lot of other people do. So when you have their attention, how can you convert them? How can you delight them? And in order to earn their trust and ultimately the gold standard is to get them to repeat often and with increasing basket size.
Yeah.
Understood. You've addressed many, many interesting points. One thing I wanted that we haven't yet talked about, if I can draw your attention to, is we've talked about ideas, systems, inventory. As you are being the CEO of a large, complicated company that's growing fast, that's expanding internationally, has to think about omni. If you could give us a bird's eye view into the top 3, 5, 7 metrics on your mental dashboard for the company, right? What do they include? They need not be only sales stuff, right? But I want founders to get a sense of how CEO of a much later stage company operates, right? How do they think about stuff? Can you give us a bird's eye into what that looks like?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm going off script now, Dion, but you can handle it.
Beyond sales, I actually like to look at all of the underlying operational levers, right? And drivers, very importantly. So for us, it's understanding also to understand what is your North Star metric, right? So one example for us would be the second order, right? That we know that typically, as you said, I think our cohorts are generally quite healthy. We know that the moment we get a customer past the second order, they would typically then come back, right? Quite frequently, meaning they shop 3 to 4 times a year. But we need to get them past the second order. So that's one metric, right? So to get there, of course, we look at the CAC, we look at first order, right? And then we look at second order. And we hope for that to increase. Then, of course, we look at other more underlying operational metrics, right? Would be NPS.
Yeah. How often do you measure NPS, Dion?
We do it monthly.
Monthly.
Yeah, we do it monthly. It's internal, right? We don't use an external third party
Got it.
agent.
And you use both in-store feedback from consumers as well as online feedback, post-order, or even abandoned orders, I guess you might ask for feedback. Okay.
Yeah, we do that. Yeah.
Okay,
And then
so
conversion rate would be another metric that's really important, very helpful, right? Conversion rate both for your online channels, for your offline channels, and of course you can dissect it in many ways, right? For online, it's really thinking about the overall funnel because
right,
this gives you a good sense of what's happening in your business, right? If the upper funnel conversion is sort of weak, you know there's something there, right? Example, it's maybe how you're showcasing the assortment, that's right?
right,
That, and they're not coming through the door, right? And there's something that's not prohibiting the customer from clicking through. If it's deeper through the funnel, then right, maybe fine, it's a more technical issue, right? There is a payment issue and so on. So I try to look at that, right? So conversion rate then also for stores, very telling because it tells you very clearly, right? Our service level sort of up to par as well, right? Or are we staffing the store enough? And these are two very operational and very, I would say, I think I like them because they're very actionable, right? You know that you can do something and you would see an impact immediately, right? Be it the next day or the week after.
So I think on the online front, people I think will have intuition for this, but what I sense that you were saying is, Samir, I care about web sessions or app sessions. I care about whether they've lingered, right? Whether they've added to cart, whether they've abandoned the cart, and then whether finally they've transacted, right? That I think there's some variation of that, but I think we can all agree that that's intuitive. Offline bit, talk to us a little bit about how you track conversion, right? Because there's no link necessarily other than Big Brother style video camera type surveillance, which don't admit if you're doing it. But how do you track conversion online, right? Is it your sales staff eyeballing stuff and saying, oh, people went into the trial room with 10 articles and then they abandoned all of them? Like, how do you get intuition for it? Or do you actually have hard data for it?
Yeah, I mean, for CR, we don't have the overall funnel, the full funnel, right, for offline. But we have the CR, right? That one is just through more basic traffic cameras, this moment in time. And then you can at least see maybe the site dwelling or if they walk through, right, the stores that we have actually visibility today. So that gives us a concrete sense. The other part then comparing that conversion also to your manpower ratio, right, would be the other bit because that gives you a good sense also of, hey, I think, do you have enough people, right, on the floor to be also driving up that conversion? And then beyond that as well, of course, I think a lot of it is also feedback to ensure there's a full loop, right, from store team. And I would say, I think this is the beauty also of Omni, right? I think a lot of times online, the data tells you, hey, I think what is going wrong or right. But through the store teams, especially of getting feedback from the fitting room, you get the why. Right. So I know that, hey, certain products are not moving because a customer might actually say, hey, this strap is actually quite scratchy. But I would never get that feedback from an online purchase ever. Right. But I think that's the feedback that you get in a more timely manner. And then you can improve, right? Either the assortment or you improve something around the visual merchandising and so on.
So talk me through that feedback loop. How fast? Because I think I like what you said, that you want things that can be actioned on. So we can do something about it rather than just having lots of data for the sake of it. So how fast, when you notice something, like just to work on your example of a scratchy strap that a sales associate noticed because lots of ladies returned it, how fast then can you get that back into your supply chain to say, hey, we made a mistake here, we need to do something about this?
Yeah. I mean, we do our typical performance meetings on a weekly basis, right? So I think the moment you get that, if we know that it's a much bigger problem to solve, right, then immediately we can escalate, right, to our supply chain. But I guess at that point in time, it's not around maybe improving a lot of the product, right, immediately for the next launch. But at least we know also if we need to pull back, right, maybe defects, right, or reduce exposure on certain products immediately to not ruin the customer experience. That I think we can do ASAP.
Got it. Yeah. No, that's very, very interesting. I wanted to talk to you specifically about inventory because that's what gives us sleepless nights as investors in apparel, right? Yeah. How do you think about layering on inventory in physical stores? And I know, of course, there's the Shein model, which many people will be familiar with, which has truncated the time from, factory to consumer, for lack of a better word. I'm not familiar with how you exactly source, but how do you think about that timeline, right? And what do you do to manage that timeline so that you don't have the kiss of death, which is out of stock in the physical retail environment, the online retail environment, but also the other side of the problem, which is far too much stock of something that's slow moving, and then you have to potentially discount it, consign it, liquidate it, who knows what else, right? So how do you manage what I feel is a very delicate balance that is even more profound in women's apparel relative to men's apparel, I would say?
Yeah, I think it really first starts with the entire range strategy, right? To be really clear around what is your evergreen core product offering, versus what's seasonal, because it's quite different, right? For evergreen core, to be very honest, it's not so much about, it's not too big on the entire speed of supply chain, right? Because it's sort of an always on category that's always there, right? What you want to do is to ensure that you have enough inventory levels, or your product life cycle, it's sort of healthy enough. And then what you spend time doing, it's really around more product innovation and iterations, right? To make that example, that hero pair of pants, the best pants possible, right? We're going to be improving, let's say, the seams, the tailoring, right? Quarter on quarter, year on year. So that's something that we do, right? So for the entire seasonal core collection, actually today it contributes to around, we change our model quite a bit, right? I think people think we have a lot of different new launches, but that actually contributes to around 30 to 40% of our business. So it's very core, it's very evergreen.
Right.
But you see new things, right? Because the new things are actually new colorways, right? So for example, it started in 2 colors. Today, there are 15 different colors.
Right.
So then we introduce new colorways, we reintroduce them. We may change up the fabric swatches, right? So we change up the material slightly. Example, there could be a more spring-summer version, right? For our markets like Hong Kong, the US, then it makes sense, right? To introduce a more fall-winter version. But the entire silhouette is exactly the same. So that's sort of core part. It's quite different. And then how we ensure that we are...
That's interesting. I think you're teaching me a lot here, which is there's a lot more nuance to this than perhaps I am applying my mind towards, and so that's interesting. We talked about, so just going back to the the bird's eye view of the key metrics that you track, right? We talked about sales, and we talked about a couple of underlying levers under sales. We talked about NPS. We talked a little bit about inventory. At least I talked a little bit about inventory. What about the human side of the equation, right? This is a delight the consumer business, right? Which has sales associates, it has real human beings who can touch and feel and have good days and bad days and don't get along and occasionally do get along. How do you think about that side of the equation, right? And what measures do you have in place to get early warning signals? Are people getting burned out? Are we having too much attrition in specific stores? Give us a sense of what that is, because again, a lot of the founders who are on this call don't have a massive amount of experience in the offline space where you have to deal with real human beings, right? So give us a sense of that.
Yeah, or human beings in general, right? I think companies are all running, it's made out of people, right? End of the day. I think your strategies and everything, they're just numbers in a model, right? I think you need your people to ensure that you are able to actually implement the strategies really well. Actually, for our employee side of things, we also look at EMPS very similarly, actually. And that gives us a good pulse, right? And it's one simple question of, hey, would you recommend Love Bonito, right? To a yes or no. So very, very similar. And for our teams, I guess it really starts first with onboarding, right? I think a lot of times you look at other numbers like attrition, all of that. But to be honest, the signals would have came up way early on, right? So we really focus also with the moment we bring in someone, we track very tightly the first 30, 60, 90 days, right? Where there are pulse check-ins already to understand how this person is performing, right? If they're happy, if they're not. Is there a misalignment also when it comes to scope? Right? Are we also very clear when we give areas of feedback, right? What they can do better, what they're good at the moment? Because that's also your time period, right? Before you also get the employee to the stage of confirmation. So we actually keep a very, very tight lid on the first 30, 60, 90 days. Yeah.
Got it. That's very, very interesting. I've seen that in very large companies. I must be honest, I haven't seen that in too many smaller companies. Because again, there's so many moving parts, but it makes a lot of sense, right? The cost of losing great people or not noticing that some people are struggling is even more pronounced at a small company, right? It's actually, you almost have to invert it and really focus in on it. And what you're telling us a little bit is that you have to drive the agenda there a little bit. Of course, you have help doing it, but you need to have a pulse on that problem yourself.
Yeah, so much more actually to add on that and note, because I think typically I noticed too, I think the moment someone has an awesome like onboarding experience and first 3 months, to be honest, they are really set up for success, right? And the moment someone comes in and they have a really terrible onboarding experience, it's like first impressions right on a date. It just goes wrong and it's very hard to salvage and come back from the situation. And if we take a few steps back, then that is where we spend time also really taking time to do our recruitment process. And I understand, I think we're all small, like growing companies and maybe you don't have that time and bandwidth, right? But I would urge everyone to spend a lot of time on recruiting. So we have typically 4 to 6 rounds for every hire.
Wow.
In the past, only recently I've stopped. In the past, I used to actually be myself involved, the final round of every single interview until the end of last year.
How big was the company in terms of employees end of last year?
I mean, through that process, 100 plus, 200. Yeah.
Wow. So all 200 people had individually met with you. People who started after you have met with you before they started.
200. Yeah. In the past, until mid of last year, at least for corporate roles, yes.
Wow. Amazing. Yeah. I wonder how many founders put in the effort and the time to do that. But I think you're giving us an example of where it's crucial, right? It's the company building. And actually, it's very interesting when you talk and hear people who built very, very large companies, talking thousands of people now. Many people will tell you the first several hundred hires, they are keenly involved in because that's what they believe sets the culture and tone, not for perpetuity. Nothing is perpetual, but certainly if you set it up the right way, the odds of success increase manifold.
100%.
And I would say, just reflecting on what you said, one of the key things we see from early stage founders, and we try and test as best as we can, is do they have the ability to attract, retain, train people who are better than them? Because if they can, and they can do it sustainably, the compounding effect is phenomenal over a 3 or 5 year time period, right? So we really try and advise as best as we can. Of course, some founders get there, some founders don't, some founders, sort of muddle along, but very, very interesting. Give me a sense of non-negotiables when it comes to hiring. Since you've been involved in so much, I know I didn't plan on talking about this, but it's our podcast. We get to do what we want. What are the non-negotiables, right? What are red strikes for you in this environment, right? Where if you feel like this, sorry, I'm not the right place for you. We're not the right place for you. Are there some just key non-negotiables that Love Bonito operates by saying, if you are like this, I'm sorry, this is not the right place for you?
I mean, it boils down to that culture fit, right? And alignment of values. I don't know. Now it sounds maybe it's very standard or cookie cutter answer, but I mean, we're very clear, right? We don't hire people who are divas, right? Who have that attitude, who are douchebags. We're just not nice people. And of course, for the environment that we are, if someone comes in, maybe makes a more chauvinistic comment, no, right? Red flag. That's a no for sure, right? Because we're a women, female centric, right? Female first brand and organization. So that's very clear.
Right.
Yeah.
Beyond that, so no chauvinist pigs. That seems to make sense. There should be no chauvinist pigs anywhere. But beyond that, what else are you looking for? I get the fit part, but are there other soft skills, technical skills, just things that you seek out, irrespective of function? I get functional expertise. This is beyond functional expertise.
Understand. Okay. Usually always try to suss out motivation. I think that's very important because that's the guiding force to that person's behavior, right? I think to just understand, I'm not looking for a specific right answer, right? Really trying to understand what is their true motivation for joining this role. And typically what I try to ask would be, hey, walk me through, why did you leave and join all of your past organizations? Because I really want to understand what makes them tick, right? And can we then as an organization really serve and make them happy and align with their motivations, right? And typically here also, it's fine, right? I think we're getting answers around, hey, I think I was very disgruntled at that workplace, right? I think I couldn't really make decisions. Then I think that's someone that we would love, right? Because we want someone to be able to challenge, right, the status quo. We want someone who actually wants to make an impact. So motivations, I think it's one thing that I feel it's quite important. Yeah.
Got it. Makes complete sense. I just wanted to remind the audience we have sort of last 15 minutes coming up. I don't think there are any questions yet. That may mean we've bored you. I hope not. But if you do have some questions, now would be the right time to start asking them so we can filter in as we start wrapping up. Give me a sense of what you're most excited about for the next 2 or 3 years. You've been at this for 5 years in a high pressure environment, grow fast, go international, deliver an omni experience that's world class, raise money a bunch of times through good times and bad times. What's now exciting for the next 2 or 3 years as you're appropriately resourced, you have a larger team, people have settled in, if you will. What's exciting?
I think the global expansion is still exciting, right? Really focusing and doubling down now on the bigger bet markets. Because honestly, I think we have a footprint, but we're not deeply entrenched, right, in a lot of these markets. Right. And that is actually that difficult part, right? And it's really not that easy to do. So I would say I think that's a very new, exciting challenge to be doing and doing more of the omnichannel bit, right? Two, as well, then extending also our categories and offering. And when we think about category expansion, it's either through building, doing it ourselves, or potentially down the line buying as well, right? And aligning ourselves with, strong sister brands, maybe in categories that are complementary to us or in regions perhaps that we're weaker in. I would say I think that's very exciting because we've never done something like that.
No, that sounds super exciting. And for some of the founders who are working in spaces where the target audience is Asian women across the world, that should be very, very interesting for them. Okay, excellent. I had sort of one last question before we wrap up and we can give people back some time today, right? If I were to talk to you again in 5 years, and maybe we will, right? And then I asked you, where is Love Bonito now, 5 years from now? What does it look like?
5 years from now.
5 years from now. I want 5-year cycles. 5 years is a good amount of time to get something done or not get something done.
That's true. You've mentioned that. Hopefully we really become the leading brand, right? The go-to destination for Asian women globally. And we're top of mind, right? When they think about, hey, I think where can they really come to when it comes to women's wear or even beyond? We're really the first brand that comes to mind.
Got it. And the way you would, so that's of course brand recall and what have you.
Yeah.
And the only way to get there is of course maintaining consumer love
Yeah.
and being razor focused on that NPS, right? I mean, that's the North Star metric. Funnily enough, you talked about that.
Yeah.
We get our founders to do NPS on us, right?
Oh, I see.
Because those are our main consumers. Who are our main consumers?
Huh?
Our LPs, right? Who trust us with money to deploy sensibly, hopefully. And our founders who we work with reasonably often, right? And in some cases, we work with day in, day out. So they are our main customers. And we did an employee NPS, and we were very lucky and fortunate to get an amazing score. Let's see how long that lasts. But we do practice what we preach here, right? Which is NPS is something we expect all founders to track carefully and really think long and hard about why it moves up or down, right? For those of you who don't know what NPS is, please look it up. It's really the gold standard way of measuring customer love, whoever your customer is. And I think it's really important that all founders get very familiar with it. I get very sick and tired of seeing NPS where people say, I have a Google rating of 4.8, that's my NPS. No, that's not your NPS. Go learn about it. Okay, we have some questions. My threads have lent to some results. Okay, I like this. On the subject of NPS, right? How do you deal with when you have unhappy customers? We all have unhappy customers. We have founders who potentially don't love us. And, occasionally they'll give you feedback.
Yeah.
Sometimes the feedback is constructive, actionable. Sometimes it's not, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you process that? And you are in a physical sales environment, so I'm sure you have some level of this. How do you process it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess in a nutshell, you have your recourse, right? And armor or various actions and templates. I mean, first of all, of course, we always acknowledge, we try to understand the issue. We acknowledge, right, what is the issue as well. We apologize, right? I think upfront, consumers just in general also usually typically value today the authenticity and transparency, right? So I think be upfront about it and then see, right, if this sort of complaint or feedback should also warrant a certain action, meaning, I guess, be it a certain credit coupon and so on, right, to also appease the customer. But I think maybe to give you a very tangible example, especially when it comes to offline retail or working with your customer experience agents, I think most importantly, customers want a response in a very timely manner. So what we do, and we ensure that is very clear of our teams, is that we give them very clear thresholds of authorization. Meaning if something goes wrong, they don't have to go up, right, to their manager to get approvals for additional budgets to appease the customer. We don't do that, right? We tell them, hey, baseline, appease the customer, right? Always, you have full authority to do that. So that the moment something happens, they can just reply. Because especially if in an offline store, to be honest, the pressure is there, right? Someone's waiting for you at the counter. You can't be like, oh, let me speak to my manager and then come back. That person's going to be super pissed. So I think the trick is to ensure that there are very clear thresholds for authorization and then empower your teams.
Got it. No, that I think is interesting, important, and of course, depending on the thresholds, difficult to figure out the right balance, right? Because you don't want to give people carte blanche, but the flip side is you want, how do you get them to take some risk as well and own that customer recovery, if you want to call it that. Interesting. I have a question from one of my other founders, Andrew from Saturdays. Thank you, Andrew, who talks about, how do you think about discounting? Right? This is hot on Andrew's mind. Andrew's has gone from 3 to 26 stores in Indonesia. I'll link you up with him when you're there next, right? So how do you think about, discounting generally, right? Whether it's on the core range, whether it's seasonal, whether it's event driven or, 11/11 driven and such like things. Is there a framework you think about discounting, or you test and learn as you go along?
I know today there's 11/11, then there's 10/10, 9/9, 8/8, it never ends. I think it really depends on who your brand is, right? To be very honest, and the type of image that you want to create. So for us, I think the image is actually quite important, and we want to ensure that we have quality cohorts of customers. So we know from our analysis and insight, a lot of the customers we acquire through a lot of big tactical moments like 11/11, to be honest, the cohorts are not that healthy, right? Because they're typically only coming, right? They're what we call sharks, right? They come in maybe once, twice a year, and then they don't come back again, right? So I think it's very different, right? I think if you're clear that, hey, I think these are more inferior cohorts, then you want to balance it out. So for us, it's very clear that we do typically 2 big major tacticals a year, your 11/11, right? And whatnot, mid-year sale. Apart from that, we try to run promotions maybe on a more segmented basis. So we fuel that through our LB Community Plus, which is our loyalty program. Right. And then it's through a CRM strategy. It's very targeted. It's very specific, right? Maybe, hey, someone is close to churning. You sort of try to get them back, right? And you try to reward them.
Or they haven't come back to you in 6 months. Hey, give us another shot. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
And I think maybe just to flip your question over on its head as well, I think to try to understand why customers sort of come to you, right? I think for us, we know that we're already quite well priced, to be very honest. And we try to brand it such that it's very clear to a customer, hey, by the way, you're already getting a very good, decent price off the bat, full price, black price, right? And for us as well, we try to always run on a hype model such that our customers are quite trained and they know that, hey, I think they're not getting something the moment it launches and it's a very hot product. It's going to run out of stock, right? So either you get it full price, you get it today. If not, actually, if you wait 15 days or something, it's actually not going to be available.
When it's gone,
right?
it's gone.
Yeah. And only if it's slower selling, then fine, right? Maybe over time, then it's on a markdown. So it's very clear in terms of decision making. I get it now, right? And I really get the trendiest, hottest item.
Got it. Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. No, thanks. That's very useful. There are a couple of questions here that are clubbed together, which are around, being a brand owner from Singapore, right? So Love Bonito is identifiably Singaporean, I would say, at least today. One question is around, is that an advantage in your mind from a consumer business point of view? Do you use that in any way, shape, or form? And of course, we're very familiar with this with many of our other businesses, some that don't talk about it and some that talk about it all the time, and then everything in between. So talk to us a little bit about that, about being a Singaporean consumer brand. At least people within Singapore would consider you that. How do you play it up or not play it up in other markets? Oh, I've stumped you. Finally, it only took me 45 minutes.
We talk openly around our history. I guess it depends. I think consumers in certain markets do think about Singapore brands as being also more, maybe I guess there's quality or there's trust, right? So I think that part, there are some benefits, but typically, I guess for the most part, consumers overseas don't really associate Singapore with, fashionable or trendy. So I think to your question, do we play it up so much? Not so much very specifically like that, right? But I think what we play up would be, we talk about Asian heritage, right? That we're proudly also from Asia, a brand also made for Asian women by Asian women. That's the part we play up. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think on the benefits, sorry, just very quick one. The benefits, I guess, of being based out of Singapore, I think from a omni-channel perspective, all of that actually, I think if you're founders who are in Singapore, I would really think about the whole omni expansion, right? I think it's a lot easier doing things in Singapore because honestly, I think the government and malls are also quite supportive, right? So leverage that and dig deep into that. Like they're really quite supportive. Yeah.
So I think you're talking again about explore your full potential in Singapore before you go further afield. Right. And I think linked to that sort of comment is, this question around, hey, you are, and to use your specific example, you're not in an unknown category. Women's apparel is a rich, deep category with lots of competitors. I couldn't even name all of them, I suspect. How do you then, as you go into region to region or city to city, how do you position LB when launching in a new market? Like, do you care about the competitive intensity at all? Or is it because it is such a large, highly fragmented market that you don't worry about competitive intensity in the same way against specific competitors? Would be interesting to hear your thoughts about that, because I think it really plays into internationalization and how you think about that for other types of brands and stories.
Yeah, understand. I mean, we first think about global positioning, right? Then actually we do extend it to each key market that we're in. So we have a positioning map very clearly, example for the US, Hong Kong, where we peg ourselves, for example, versus key international players in market, and then key regional players or local players. And that will change, right, market to market. But at least for fashion, what we see based on where we are hitting, the international players are pretty much the same, right? It's the likes of Zara, to be honest, who we're competing with, Zara, Uniqlo, Mango, and so on, H&M and so on. So it is really sort of the same group. What would be different between each market then would be pricing, because pricing is always relative, right, to where everyone's pricing in market. So we actually do price quite differently actually between markets, because the definition of affordability is also different, right, between Singapore, let's say, versus Australia versus the US. So I think if you're doing an omni-channel brand or you're having a global fulfillment, I think that's where it gets interesting, because you can sort of even out your margins or arbitrage between markets, right? So in Southeast Asia, maybe we price lower because the market's also more affordable, but you can really price at maybe a 20 or 30% premium in developed markets, actually. And we do that right now. Yeah.
Got it.
And you're still considered affordable, right?
Do you worry about competition coming to you at all, right? Like, so you talked about your competitor set, and it's mostly the international large apparel houses, I would call them, brands that all of us know and have grown up with. There are now some, I don't want to call them copycats, that would be uncharitable, but folks who are inspired by Love Bonito's success, let's use that word, right? Do you worry about that at all? Or do you worry about the likes of Shein, very, very fast fashion, churning stuff out really, really fast, dare I say, almost too cheap to be true, And does that keep you up at night?
Yeah. Okay. I think when it comes to copycats, to be honest, it shows us that we're doing something right. Right. I think if we stop seeing people trying to copy something, I think then it's quite worrying. Actually, on the flip side, do we worry so much about that? No. I think because end of the day, we're very clear about positioning, right? I can't remember, it was this huge beauty brand. Sorry, I just forgot which brand now, but the founder said something really important, right? That she doesn't really care too much about what's happening outside, but really looking inward at customer feedback, right? And really improving and iterating. Do we care so much about Shein? Not so much, because it's a very different positioning and ballgame, right? They're really going around lower quality items, a lot more affordable, right? It's for a slightly less discerning customer. And the occasion and category mixes are actually quite different, right? I think we're quite clear around who we are and we know the customer that we're trying to target, right? I think the only sort of way that we could sabotage ourselves would be if we didn't listen, right, to our customers' feedback and we're not improving our game.
Nice. I like that. I mean, another way of describing that is we're not trying to be all things to all people. We're trying to be the right thing for our people. Know who your tribe is and focus on your tribe, right? I like that a lot. Okay, I'll give you one last one and then I will let you go for dinner since we're now getting up to 7:30 here in Singapore. Yes, I wanted to, we've talked tangentially today about the back end, right? Tech, warehouse operations, omni, seamless technology. You said something fascinating that if I find a dress that my wife would like, you can tell me whether it's available on the Orchard store or in the Ion store. That's super cool. I wish more apparel makers could do that. How much of that is, build and integrate? How much of that is off the shelf? How much of that is completely proprietary? Can you give us the secret sauce here?
I would say, I think in a nutshell, e-commerce and retail, it's not so much rocket science, right? So I think there are a lot of, at least in the back end, there are a lot of different tools and platforms that can do what we need to do. Then it's about integrating, right, all of the right platforms together. Yeah.
Got it. Well, Dion, this has been my great pleasure to have you on this episode. Thanks a lot for making the time. I individually am very excited to continue to observe how Love Bonito does. I know you and I will be talking separately about various different things over the coming years. But again, thanks a lot. Thanks everyone who gave us 1 hour of their time. Hopefully this was useful. For those of us who would like to reach out to DSG, you know where to find us. LinkedIn, Twitter, all that jazz. Thanks a lot. Good night.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.